Welcome to Andy Ari On3. Our week of deep dives continues, and this time it's a team that finished last season in the national title game and was into this season expecting to go pretty deep in the playoff. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish. You were a believer all last season, Ari.
I'm a visionary. What can I say? I don't know. I'm wrong enough. When I'm right, I need to lean into it. I nailed that. Good. The one thing I'll say about Notre Dame going into this season that I think is something that we always need to make sure we go out of our way to represent when we talk about a team in the offseason, when they've made a seismic shift in program stature and program reputation, right? Notre Dame did not win the national title last year. They came close. They did not. But the way that we as a country collectively view Notre Dame in terms of taking it seriously and giving them the flowers of a team that actually can compete at that level, I think is a seismic shift in their brand persona that was around 3, 4, maybe even going into last year.
Yeah, it's not the Notre Dame team that would make the 4-team playoff and then lose a semifinal and thanks for playing. Like, they played against Georgia right off the bat in the Sugar Bowl and beat them. Like they beat Indiana, they go to Georgia, or they go to New Orleans, they beat Georgia, they beat Penn State. Like, they earned their way into the national title game, and I see no let up in terms of talent, in terms of roster acquisition. Let's get deeper into this version of Notre Dame. From Blue and Gold on 3's Notre Dame site, Tyler Horka joins us. How are we doing, Tyler?
Good. How are you guguys?
We're very, very excited about. I'm always excited about a team that can, and I know I've said this a million times on the show, but it is a fascinating stat for me. 2 offensive linemen who started the national title game had to transfer because they probably weren't going to start. Like, that is, in terms of what you bring back, that's pretty good.
Yeah, that's reality. Obviously, Pat Coogan going down to Indiana is a interesting dynamic as a part of that, because he was really the rallying force of Notre Dame's offensive line last year. Like, when it got to a point where you knew that Notre Dame's offensive line was Joe Moore Award semifinalist good, you were like, okay, that's because Pat Coogan came in for the injured Ashton Craig at center. And this guy is not only playing super, super well on the field, but he's an emotional leader as well. I think anyone who went to a Notre Dame playoff game down the stretch last season, you saw those fiery speeches that he was giving that are not PG-13. Like, I don't even know if they were R-rated, man. They were from a different stratosphere and universe. But you lose that guy because, yeah, Ashton Craig is going to be healthy, and I think he's going to be a full participant in fall camp. And then just the way that Notre Dame has recruited the offensive line, you've got some really talented freshmen. Like, a guy like Will Black is coming in. You don't even know if he's going to play. Gerby Lambert's going to be a sophomore. Does he even have a spot on the field right now? Because you look at what Notre Dame did last year with Anthony Knapp and Emil Wagner at the tackle positions, and basically everything that we heard throughout the spring was, yeah, we love those guys there, which was very enlightening and shocking to a lot of us because you thought Charles Jagasaw was going to be one of those tackles.
Yeah, I thought Anthony Knapp would get moved to guard, and then Jagasaw moves back to tackle, but it sounds like Jagasaw is going to stay at guard. And I realize we're going very deep in the offensive line here, but like, this stuff matters.
Yeah, and look, Marcus Freeman came in 3 years ago, and he said, I don't know much about being a head coach, but I do know you need a really good offensive line. You need to be really good up front on both sides of the ball. And he nailed that one, because Notre Dame does not get to the national championship last year. Well, ironically, without those 2 guys that you just saw in the photo there, Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler. But as you mentioned, Andy, I think Notre Dame is still going to be very, very good up front. It's Jagasaw, it's Knapp, it's Wagner, Craig, all of these other guys. Billy Shrout is the only other projected starter that we haven't mentioned. You take those 5, and I think any team in the country takes those 5 and says, I like my chances. No matter what system we're running, I like my chances with those 5 guys.
I will say this, though, and I don't know if anybody agrees with this, but like Pat Coogan, like, you could just look at that guy's face and know that he's like meant to be a Notre Dame guy. I'm kind of sad he's gone. Like, he looks like a Notre Dame guy, doesn't he? Physically, like, that's a Notre Dame 100%. Guy right there.
He's a like Chicago Catholic school kid. Like, he's everything. Yeah.
He's Joe Alt. He's Patterson from recent years. He's Josh Lugg. Like you look at him and you see all of those guys. And yeah, he was everything for Notre Dame last year. Like I said, without that guy, and you can say that about so many different, and we're probably going to get into a lot of it, but so many different guys that stepped up for Notre Dame to get there last year, which is it's a little bit worrisome for me because it's like how many things can go right to get you to the right spot at the end of the season in back-to-back seasons. Like you're going to have some things go wrong this year. Does enough go in response to that to get all the way back to where they were last year? I'm not sure. But on the flip side of that, just like last year, I think you're starting from a really good starting point and you like who you have before all the injuries and before all the decisions that you have to make. So yeah, Notre Dame's in a really good spot, offensive line and on through the rest of the roster as well.
Well, and I think that's so interesting. You talk about stuff going wrong. And one of the bigger knocks against Notre Dame in the Brian Kelly era and until last year was they just couldn't build the depth required to compete deeper into the season against these really good teams. But if I'd have told you at the beginning of the season, Notre Dame is going to lose Ashton Craig and Charles Jagasaw pretty much right off the bat. Benjamin Morrison's not going to play the whole season. And then Riley Mills will get knocked out in the first game of the playoff, and they'll still win 2 more games. Like, would you have believed me?
No, probably not. But I think you mentioned Benjamin Morrison. The cornerback position is no better. There's no better example than that of the depth that has been built in the Marcus Freeman era, because you go back to the Brian Kelly tenure, and your cornerbacks to begin with, I'm not going to name any names because it would be wrongful of me to do that to those guys, but you saw what happened against Clemson and those really good wide receivers. You saw what happened against Alabama and those really good wide receivers. Now, Benjamin Morrison goes down. You got somebody who Benjamin Morrison literally said at about the same time last year, it was fall camp, he said, Leonard Moore is going to be better than I have been here in my Notre Dame tenure. And everyone couldn't believe that because you're like, Benjamin Morrison, you had 6 picks as a true freshman All-American. Like you're going to be a first or second round NFL draft pick, which he was even coming off of the hip injury. And somehow, it seems like Leonard Moore comes in and he's just as good. He's a big reason why Penn State had no wide receiver catches in that Orange Bowl. If not for Leonard Moore getting matched up against Jeremiah Smith in the national championship game, and look, Ohio State did an awesome job moving him around. But like if Notre Dame doesn't have a Leonard Moore in that game, it's probably even worse of a final score than it was. And it's more than a 24-point deficit at the worst in that game. So he's a dude. I think Christian Gray at his best, he struggles with some consistency and confidence pieces, but at his best, he's a guy that Notre Dame didn't have during the Brian Kelly era either. So like the depth at the corner position is basically telling of everything else that's going on in this roster too. Because like you said, Andy, you lose Riley Mills, you lose all these other guys, and there's Notre Dame in Atlanta playing Ohio State for the national championship.
So I like to do this, Andy, and you know this about me. I like to do the broad brush because I know we're going to get deeper in. But from your perspective, people on your board, people who read your stuff, true Notre Dame fans, where are they at in terms of expectation of this team now? Have they shifted in your point of view?
I think they have, and it's a little bit scary because Notre Dame fans, as passionate as they are, they could be a little pessimistic at times too, or just real. They can be realists because a lot of the national narrative, the true fans, the guys that are there every single Saturday, they feel it too. They knew that Notre Dame hadn't won a big bowl game, a major bowl game, however you want to define it, since 1993. Like it had been 3 decades. But then you do it against Georgia, as Andy mentioned, in the Sugar Bowl. You do it against Penn State in the Orange Bowl. And all of a sudden, I think these fans are truly believing that Marcus Freeman and this Fighting Irish team can do it every single year. And the beauty of the playoff is like more of those games matter now. So winning a Sugar Bowl in a quarterfinal, like that meant something and it mattered. But winning a Sugar Bowl in a 4-team playoff year when it wasn't a part of the playoff, like I think people, sometimes you can forget about those types of wins. But Notre Dame fans have not forgotten about that Sugar Bowl. They have not forgotten about that Orange Bowl. And to answer your question, Ari, I think it's a run it back type of attitude that these fans are taking into 2025. They feel like the Irish can be there again. And quite honestly, they won it all this time. Because as we mentioned, as great of a season as it was, they didn't win the whole thing. And now I think these Irish fans truly believe that that's the next step, and it's actually an attainable one.
I mean, I think they're probably pessimistic to a certain extent because they went 20 years or whatever it was without winning a major bowl game. So, like, seeing it with your own eyes, I think is proof that it can be done. Because I think if a Notre Dame fan was being honest with itself, I'll be honest with myself, I would wonder if Notre Dame's limitations as a university in terms of, you know, their admissions and their culture made it impossible for them to compete at the highest level. And it looks like the sport, they've gotten better, no question, but the sport has also become more manageable too. And the hope for Notre Dame is the next time they get into that position, which could be as soon as this year, they don't have to play an Ohio State team. That's, you know, I don't know that team's going to exist anymore.
Notre Dame has always been in that unique position where it knows it can be good every single year. Like, you're still going to get good enough recruits just on brand name alone and who you've been for 100 years. But like you said, in the last couple of decades, there's been some limitations there where the Ohio States are able to keep, like, they're distancing themselves from the field more than a Notre Dame has. Now, Marcus Freeman is maybe leveling the playing field more than ever. Maybe the House settlement could help in that regard too. Like, who knows what that looks like, but NIL might not be what it was in 2021 or 2022, where in those seasons, Notre Dame still had a thing where it's like, okay, we can't outbid these boosters for some of these players that SEC schools and Big Ten schools are getting. Now, like, the recruiting, I think we all know with Marcus Freeman is top notch. And whatever happens in terms of the way this landscape shakes out, and part of that is the playoff, right? Like, and that's been beneficial to Notre Dame, and it's helped that Notre Dame has had athletic directors in the rooms making these decisions that Notre Dame has said, hey, yeah, we like the way that this is written up. It actually helps us out, so we're going to go with it. Pretty much every single time that anything has come out with the playoff, Notre Dame's been completely fine with it. And we just saw a Notre Dame run in a playoff where they get all the way to the very last game. So with all these things kind of shaking in Notre Dame's favor, and with that guy, Marcus Freeman, leading the way, I think you can shift from maybe more of a pessimistic to an optimistic view. Like, maybe Notre Dame is finally turning a corner that in 2005, it definitely was not. And maybe even 2015, in the middle of the Brian Kelly era, it still was not, because you still felt like Notre Dame was lagging behind a little bit.
Biggest question mark going into the offseason was quarterback. Now, we know one thing. It is not going to be a one-year rental. After Sam Hartman and Riley Leonard the past 2 years, it's going to be somebody who's been on Notre Dame's roster. So we're all assuming CJ Carr nationally. Are we wrong there, or does Kenny Minchie have a shot at this thing?
There's more nuance to it than we thought, obviously, because a lot of us didn't think that Kenny Minchie would be here right now. Quite frankly, I don't even know if I did, and I was one of the higher guys on the beat on Kenny Minchie. Like, I saw his game, and I said, that could work. That could work at Notre Dame, and that could work somewhere else. The fact that he's still here, I think, says a lot about him, and you need to kind of quell those worries. Like, hey, is he just the complete outcast in this? I don't want to say Steve Angeli was, but obviously Steve Angeli was not the answer either. But I say all that, and I still go back to CJ Carr, and I say it just feels like the right time to start a sophomore who just sat through a 16-game season. He saw what that looked like from Riley Leonard in terms of being the starter from the start to finish. Has he started a game in his college career? No. But at some point, you have to start that first one, right? And yeah, maybe it would be a little bit nicer if it was against some directional school at home, Notre Dame Stadium, South Bend, easy victory. But we've seen Notre Dame lose those games too. And like the same Riley Leonard who went down to Texas A&M, College Station, in that rowdy environment last year is the one that lost the very next week. So against Northern Illinois at home, anything can happen. Anything can happen with CJ Carr as well. I don't think you have to protect him in any sort of way just because he's a true sophomore, redshirt freshman. I think you throw him out there against Miami and you say, hey, this is our guy, not just right now, but probably in the future as well. And you see what you got. And if you don't got something that you like in a couple of quarters or that entire game, maybe you do start Kenny Minchie at some point. But either way, I think Notre Dame, like you said, Andy, is in a spot where you've got a homegrown guy in either one of them. And, you know, that's a pretty cool thing for Notre Dame because 3 of the last 4 years, you haven't had that. You've gone to the transfer portal. Now they're going to start one of their own.
Sometimes I wonder if having a homegrown quarterback is a sign of program growth. And sometimes I wonder if I'm just full of crap. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, if you nail a 1-year rental from the transfer portal, that's a sign of good program growth and
Ohio
whatnot
State
as well.
last year.
Ohio State last year. I was literally just about to say it. Everyone was like, "Oh my
Yep.
gosh, they're going to go with Will Howard." Yeah, who's laughing now? They win the national championship, and quite frankly, Notre Dame's an example of it too. Like Riley Leonard got Notre Dame to the national championship game. Would a true freshman CJ Carr have done that? Would Steve Angeli have done that as a junior? I'm not sure. But to answer your question, Ari, I think a homegrown guy who is clearly the guy, that's a sign of program positivity and a sign of a program that's in a good spot. Because if you miss on CJ Carr, swing and a miss, and you whiff on Kenny Minchie, then all of a sudden you're like, okay, how good are we at this actually? Like, where is our program? Because neither of these guys are going to get us to where we want to go.
Yeah, and I think that's the part. It seemed like the confidence in CJ Carr. Like I go back to when Deuce Knight decommitted and started looking around again. That seemed to be the signal to me that, Notre Dame thinks they know who they have for the next couple of years.
Yeah, and if you read between some of the lines in the interviews that Marcus Freeman has done, there was one, I can't remember if it was a national thing or who he said it to, or maybe even said it to us in a press conference on the beat, but there was a point where CJ Carr was not very far into being on campus and being on this Notre Dame roster, and all of a sudden Marcus Freeman starts saying stuff like, yeah, we got the quarterback of the future on our roster. He could have said that at any point when Steve Angeli was here for 3 years, and Kenny Minchie was here for a whole year longer than CJ Carr as well. But then Marcus Freeman goes, yeah, we got the guy. He didn't say it was CJ Carr, but again, read between the lines. It's pretty easy to tell that as soon as that guy stepped on campus, there was a little bit of a seminal shift, if you will, where you're like, okay, yeah, like Deuce Knight, that sucked. You thought you were going to get a top 5 quarterback in the country, but you still got this guy, CJ Carr, who's going to be a redshirt freshman. He's probably going to be your starting quarterback and be a really good one.
How much practice do you guys get to watch?
It varies based on the spring or the fall. Like for example, we'll go into this fall and we'll be crossing our fingers and hoping that the schedule says 10 practices because
I remember those days.
Yeah, I think the spring was 6 or something, but in every single big schedule, so like the spring or the fall, we will see one full entire practice, and it's usually pretty late in the game, and that's when we're taking all of our notes and we're really getting a good glimpse of who.
So you got to see that in the spring.
Yep.
Did CJ Carr do anything that made you go like this, like Kevin McAllister?
I don't know if it was that, but in a bad way, like, oh my gosh.
No, in a good way. Like, wow, he has it. You know, I feel like
here's what else.
The open practices, like when I was a beat writer, like were like stretching. Like we never really got to see for the most part. There were times where I remember seeing players do things in practice that made you think, wow, I think that this guy has it. Like I didn't know if you had a moment like that with either.
Actually, I'm glad you kind of filibustered there because it brought me to something.
Good.
The open practice that we had in the spring, the very last throw of the game. So a lot of it was the defense won, and I don't think you guys would be shocked to hear that. Notre Dame's got a really good defense. Whoa, breaking news. But the very last play of the scrimmage, it was a full-on blitz. So Chris Ash is doing his best Al Golden, right, and sending everybody. I want to say it was like jailbreak, 7 or 8 guys, man on the outside. CJ Carr obviously recognized that, diagnosed it, and just threw up you remember that throw that Quinn Ewers had against Alabama in Tuscaloosa? I think it was the 2023 season where he dropped it in a bucket to Xavier Worthy in the back of the end zone. And Matthew McConaughey was standing right there. I think he might've been on the Pat McAfee cast at the time. And he was like, oh my gosh, I'd never seen a ball come down like that. CJ Carr did that to Elijah Burris, who is Plaxico Burris' son. He's a true freshman wide receiver at Notre Dame. And it just fell right into the bucket. And Burris, to his credit, beat his man, but you couldn't have placed the ball any better. And yeah, Ari, I was looking around at people like nobody else threw a ball like that all day. And I'm not sure for the rest of this year, anyone that wears a Notre Dame uniform is going to throw a ball like that if his name isn't CJ Carr. So yeah, he's got a little bit of an it factor there, and we saw it on that play.
Well, let's talk about the guys he throws to. You just mentioned Burris, but Jaden Greathouse definitely during that comeback in the national title game. I think Jaden Greathouse was the one that everybody's like, "Oh, wow, okay, this could be different." And then you've also got Jordan Faison, who double sport guy, lacrosse superstar too. And then Will Pauling, the transfer from Wisconsin, I think is really interesting because I feel like he was Wisconsin's most reliable guy when he was healthy.
Yeah, so Greathouse, we'll start there. Everyone thinks he can be a wide receiver one, and if you watch the Orange Bowl or the national championship game, you saw a wide receiver one. Like he was the best wide receiver in a game with Jeremiah Smith. That doesn't happen very often. I'm just talking about like what we saw
that night.
Game. Yeah, and I know Jeremiah Smith ends up winning the game as well, and that's probably the best play of the game. But like Jaden Greathouse was on that level, and we have to remember that this is one of the best Texas high school wide receivers of all time. Like he played his ball right outside of Austin, so the Longhorns would have loved to get this guy. Anybody in the SEC would have loved to get this guy. Notre Dame got him, and I don't want to say he's been a project, but like you look at his statistics in the first couple of seasons, and you're like, is this all he's going to be? It's funny. I'm doing a feature on him for our Blue and Gold preview magazine, and I actually talked to his mom, and his mom told me like she asked her husband, is he just like not good at the college level? Is everything that we saw in high school not what like I thought that was going to translate? It finally did in those last two games. 13 catches, 233 yards, 3 touchdowns. Is he going to have that every single 2-week stretch of his junior season? No, but I think he's going to have more games like that, and he didn't have any games like that in his first 2 seasons.
It's an explosiveness and can take the top off the defense or create a huge play out of a small play that I feel like Notre Dame has had a hard time with the last 5 years. No?
Yeah, and Greathouse at his best is going to give you that. Like he literally put a Penn State defender on his fanny just sitting on the field there at Hard Rock Stadium. You don't see that too often between teams of this stature, if you will, Notre Dame and Penn State. So he can give you that. Jordan Faison literally got injured in the first game of the year at Texas A&M, rolled his ankle, was never the same the rest of the year. Like if you looked at him, he was wearing heavy tape on his ankle every single week, even sat out a few games, never got right. We talked to Mike Denbrock for our preview magazine recently as well, one-on-one with Blue and Gold, and he said a healthy Faison is going to be a problem for a lot of defenses. So you've got 2 guys right there who I think they're both true juniors. They're both going to be taking that next step in their career, and I think you're going to see the best of them that you've ever seen. But then the interesting part of that is you got 2 dudes right there, and then you bring in Will Pauling and Malachi Fields. I don't think like Notre Dame's been trying to get this wide receiver transfer thing right for years now. It just hasn't happened. You look at Chris Mitchell last year, Bo Collins, and Collins gave you some things here and there. But if Malachi Fields is the same guy that he was at Virginia, just catching passes over the backs of dudes, like over the helmets, like the best you just got mossed type of stuff that you see every single week. He was doing that at Virginia. If he does that at Notre Dame, that's something that they haven't had. And then Will Pauling is just like the depth that you've never had at the wide receiver position, because he's going to play the same spot as Jaden Greathouse a lot of times. But if you take out Jaden Greathouse and you put in Will Pauling and he's the same guy that he was at Wisconsin, that's a swap that you never had at Notre Dame. Like Notre Dame was just relying on its starters, and its starters weren't very good for years and years. Now you have depth at the position. Now you have versatile playmakers from 6'4" Fields to 5'10" Faison. And I think you finally have like a national championship caliber wide receiver unit, which you didn't even have last year playing in the national championship game.
And by the way, we haven't mentioned maybe the best offensive player on the roster, Jeremiyah Love. So who did not have the best national championship game, but was pretty damn good the rest of the time.
Yeah, and he was pretty dang injured in the national championship game. You got to remember that. Got hurt against USC in the regular season finale. Never was the same the rest of the year. Like, I don't know if he had more than 9 carries in any single game in the playoff. And he still scored that fantastic, miraculous touchdown against Penn State, which there's not many guys who can have a 98-yard touchdown in the playoff and that not be their best touchdown of the playoff, because that 2-yarder against
the 2-yarder was way better. I was there for that one.
It's like Abdul Carter just whiffed on this guy. Like that's when you know you're something special. So yeah, that guy right there is one of the most talented players in college football. And he's not going to get the Heisman buzz because of the reason that I just mentioned. Even when he is healthy, he's not getting 20 carries, 30 carries like an Ashton Ginty did last year. But boy, does he make the most of his carries, and he's electrifying. And I think that actually kind of helps him. Like Notre Dame is onto something where, hey, let's just give this guy the ball 15 to 20 times in a game, rushes and catches included. And he's probably going to do something really, really cool with those 15 to 20 touches, no matter how they come or when they come. Because like he jumps over guys too. That's a really cool thing he does too. He doesn't just run away from them or run through them. He literally jumps over them. The hurdle at USC was fantastic. So yeah, that's a centerpiece, and that's a guy that's got to stay healthy because there's not a whole lot of people like him in college football.
The thing that I want to get to, and I don't know if we can quantify it as we're nearing the end of this, Andy, you help me. Tyler, you're the guy. What do you think is the biggest systematic change in college football that has benefited Notre Dame the most? That's a tough question, but do you think it's the expansion of the playoff? Do you think it's NIL? Do you think it's the transfer portal? Like what was limiting Notre Dame in 2017 that is freeing them up to the next level from like a roster construction standpoint in your mind?
Yeah, I'll go through it quickly. It's definitely not the transfer portal because as selective as Notre Dame is and like efficient with it, you're still only bringing in 5 to 8 guys. Like I think they brought in 8 this year or last year, and that was the most that they've ever brought in. Whereas you can completely overhaul a roster at a place like Indiana and get yourself to the playoff, right? So it's not the transfer portal because the admissions thing is just killing Notre Dame on that front still. Like Riley Leonard was 3 years at Duke, right? He didn't get all of his classes to transfer to Notre Dame. Like there were things that he took at Duke that didn't count at Notre Dame, and he had to start from ground zero in some points. That was kind of crazy and shocking to me. So it's not the transfer portal. NIL, I think, is a bigger plus for Notre Dame than people make it out to be. Like people make it out to be a negative, but like Jeremiyah Love bought his mom a Porsche and he was kind of public with that. He's like, yeah, I was able to do that because of NIL. So Marcus Freeman always says, if you're good enough at football, you're going to get paid at Notre Dame. That's like, you're going to be fine here. But I go back to something I mentioned earlier in the show, and it's the playoff, man, because like Notre Dame was able to enjoy that awesome ride because it played games that, you know, it can win up to the point of playing Ohio State in the national championship game. And again, I said earlier, those are games that Notre Dame did not win for years and years and years. But like when all things are going right and you got a Notre Dame team with Marcus Freeman at the helm that's recruiting at a really good rate, and recruiting's been by and large the same. I know NIL's changed it a lot in that way, but like Notre Dame is still kind of recruiting the same now as it did 10, 15 years ago. It's just got a better guy who's leading that operation, and you're seeing that on the field. But with the playoff, you hosted Indiana and you won by 10 points. You were up by like 20 points in that game. You got the confidence from that, and you went down to the Sugar Bowl and beat Georgia in the Sugar Bowl, and you beat Penn State in the Orange Bowl. So expansion of the playoff and Notre Dame's access to it, that's the buzzword that they like to use in South Bend. Like the playoff is totally accessible. It's accessible now more than ever with Notre Dame being able to get a top 4 seed and a first-round bye. I think they really like the home game, and they wouldn't be the maddest people in the world if you saw another game in South Bend in late December. But with this playoff, I think a lot of people hopped on the Notre Dame bandwagon, and it was an excellent thing for Notre Dame. Like you felt the palpable energy as they went through that bracket. And I'll close that by saying in the BCS era, you got matched up against Alabama. You knew you were going to lose to Alabama, and that was that. Clemson, you knew you were going to lose to Clemson, and that was that. This was different, and I think the expansion of the playoff is great for Notre Dame and a lot of other people too.
Yeah, I also think Andy, and we've talked about this, but I think that the transfer portal might not be their number one source of talent, but it makes other teams not as good, which then makes it easier.
It weakens Georgia. It weakens because Georgia is an example of a roster that Notre Dame in 2018 probably would have struggled to compete with that kind of roster. But I want to ask you this, Tyler. How much of that is also just Marcus Freeman versus Brian Kelly as a recruiter?
Yeah. Again, I don't think the recruiting has it's changed tremendously for Notre Dame, but that's because of Marcus Freeman. Like if Brian Kelly was doing the things that Marcus Freeman was doing, shoot, man, maybe they would have had a chance against that Clemson team. I don't know about that Alabama team. Probably nobody's beaten them, but maybe you make the playoff more often during the Kelly tenure as well if you're recruiting at that rate. It's kind of crazy that he was here for 12 years and never really figured out the recruiting piece, because Marcus Freeman's been here for 3-4 if you include 2021 as a defensive coordinator. And even in that 2021 year, like Brian Kelly was still the head coach and Marcus Freeman was his defensive coordinator. And all anyone wanted to talk about was the recruiting shift. And like that coincided perfectly with Marcus Freeman arriving on campus. So the recruiting absolutely has been monumental. But I do like Ari shouting out the transfer portal, because, I don't think Notre Dame beats the Georgias of old, like the ones that were winning the national titles. And I know
2022 Georgia wins that game handily, but that's
why is 2024 Georgia worse than that Georgia? Because they lost a lot of players, and there were more places for players that they were trying to go to. Like they missed out on a lot of players via the portal as well. So yeah, the transfer portal is a good shout.
It's fascinating to watch, because I think Ari's right about this. Like Notre Dame is probably the biggest example of how the systemic shifts in the sport can change a program's fortune.
Notre Dame and Penn State are the two biggest beneficiaries in my mind.
But the part that makes it hard for me, and that's why I asked you that question, is that all happened at the same time Notre Dame changed coaches. So, or at the same time one coach left. So it's hard it becomes a chicken and egg argument. But now we know, let me call it the schedule, because we did a whole show on Notre Dame and USC and whether that series should continue. Mm-hmm. We know they're on the schedule this year. Whether that continues or not, we'll see. But Miami and Texas A&M to open. Boise State comes to South Bend. And then it gets pretty manageable.
Does that schedule not scream to you, just get through those first two and you're home free? Like, I get it, Boise State playoff team last year, but you get them at home. And like with the Texas A&M game, you get a bye week. Like, you don't think there were people here in South Bend trying to pull some strings saying, hey, we'll go play Sunday of Labor Day weekend, but could you give us the following Saturday off before we host these Aggies who want to exact some revenge on us? So I think Notre Dame can win both of those games. I wouldn't be shocked if they lost one, but even if you do, the next 10 are winnable. And we saw a Notre Dame team last year that won 13 games in a row. Is this schedule as easy? Maybe. Like you never really know with some of these teams. Like USC is the ultimate wild card that you never really know with. But I like this schedule for Notre Dame. I think it sets up to where, like I said, get through the first two and you're feeling really good about yourself. If you win those first two games, there's not another game on the schedule that you're saying, yeah, I'm worried that we're going to lose this one, because you just proved to yourself that you beat probably the two best opponents on your schedule, and they happened in the first two games.
Also, you can lose to Northern Illinois and make the playoff, although everybody on this schedule is tougher than that. So we shall see. But Tyler, this was awesome. Thank you so much, and very, very excited to see the Fighting Irish this year. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys. You put that schedule on there, and all of a sudden I can feel like I'm in Miami already. Let's just say that.
Happy Labor Day weekend. Cannot wait.